Trace your finger along the map of the Atlantic Ocean in the winter of 1717 and follow the trade winds north of the Bahamas, where warm Caribbean currents collide violently with cold Atlantic air, creating walls of gray fog thick enough to swallow entire fleets without leaving so much as a mast visible above the waves. Smell the rot of seawater trapped inside oak hulls soaked for months beneath relentless spray. Hear the snapping canvas of square-rigged sails straining against crosswinds while tar-blackened hemp rigging groans through swollen dead-eyes slick with salt. Somewhere inside that fog, a pirate ship is moving silently across black water, its lanterns extinguished, its gun ports sealed shut, its crew half convinced they are already dead. Then the ship vanishes completely. No wreckage washes ashore. No survivors emerge from the mist. No confirmed sighting follows again. Only rumors remain drifting from tavern to tavern across the Atlantic world about a pirate vessel that disappeared so completely. Sailors began speaking of it less as a ship and more as a curse carried by the sea itself. The vessel was believed by many to be the Galleon, the infamous pirate flagship captured by Samuel Bellamy before its catastrophic destruction near Cape Cod in April 1717. Yet over time, witnesses and legends transformed the story into something darker. Some sailors insisted the ship never truly sank at all. They claimed it sailed directly into a fog bank during a violent storm and vanished forever with all hands aboard. To understand how such legends formed, it is necessary to understand the terrifying reality of 18th century maritime navigation. Pirate ships of the era existed inside a world where weather itself killed more sailors than cannon fire. The Whydah began life not as a pirate vessel but as a heavily armed English slave ship launched in London around 1715. Displacing approximately 300 tons burthen and measuring nearly 100 feet in length along the gun deck. The vessel possessed a reinforced oak hull constructed using massive curved futtocks fastened together with iron spikes, hand-forged inside dockyard furnaces. The tumble-home design narrowed the upper hull inward above the waterline, improving stability while complicating enemy boarding attempts. Originally, the Whydah transported enslaved Africans through the Atlantic trade routes, carrying human cargo packed below deck in conditions so suffocating and disease-ridden that mortality rates frequently exceeded 20% during long voyages. The ship mounted multiple bronze cannon forged from copper-rich alloys containing roughly 88% copper and 10% tin, artillery pieces capable of firing iron round shot weighing between 6 and 12 pounds, using carefully measured black powder charges composed of saltpeter, sulfur, and charcoal milled into coarse grains optimized for naval combat. Once ignited through touch holes by linstocks or flint mechanisms, the powder generated explosive gas expansion reaching temperatures above 2,000 degrees Celsius, hurling iron shot through enemy hulls while transforming shattered oak planking into clouds of splinters sharp enough to sever arteries and puncture lungs instantly. When pirate captain Samuel Bellamy captured the Whydah in February 1717 near the Bahamas, he transformed it into one of the most heavily armed pirate ships operating in Atlantic waters. Bellamy himself differed from many pirate captains of the era. Contemporary accounts describe him as educated, charismatic, and unusually disciplined compared to the drunken brutality common among buccaneers. Yet despite this reputation, Bellamy still commanded a floating war machine optimized for violence. The pirate crew expanded the ship's armament to nearly 28 cannon distributed along reinforced gun decks, stained black from powder residue and seawater. Spare muskets, pistols, boarding axes, and cutlasses lined bulkheads while powder monkeys carried cartridges wrapped in coarse linen through sulfur smoke, thick enough during combat to blind sailors temporarily. Life aboard remained brutal. Bilge water stagnated beneath lower decks where shipworms bored through submerged hull timbers. Salted beef rotted inside leaking barrels while biscuit stores dissolved into mold and weevils. Rats nested among spare rigging and sailcloth. Yet, despite the misery, pirate crews preferred such conditions to service aboard merchant or naval vessels where floggings, starvation wages, and forced impressment destroyed thousands yearly. Bellamy's articles of agreement promised more equal distribution of loot and compensation for injuries sustained during battle. A sailor losing his right arm might receive 600 pieces of 8, an eye perhaps 100. This strange mixture of democracy and violence drew desperate men toward piracy, despite the constant risk of execution. But by April 1717, the Whydah carried enormous treasure captured from dozens of raids along Atlantic shipping lanes. Gold dust, silver coins, ivory, sugar, indigo, and navigational instruments cluttered the cargo holds while the ship sailed northward through increasingly unstable weather systems approaching the New England coast. That was when the fog arrived. The Atlantic fog banks near Cape Cod formed through violent atmospheric collision between cold Labrador currents descending from the north and warmer Gulf Stream waters rising from the Caribbean. Sailors feared these conditions because visibility could collapse from miles to mere feet within minutes. Lantern light reflected strangely through suspended moisture while sound traveled unpredictably across the water, making distant waves or cannon fire seem unnaturally close. Navigational instruments during the early 18th century remained primitive compared to modern standards. Mariners relied upon magnetic compasses vulnerable to local variation, hourglasses measuring speed through dead reckoning calculations, and celestial navigation requiring visible stars or sun positions impossible to observe through dense cloud and fog. Once weather obscured the sky, even experienced captains could drift unknowingly toward disaster. Bellamy's fleet approached Cape Cod during the night of April 26, 1717, beneath worsening conditions. Wind intensified steadily, while rain hammered the sails hard enough to loosen stitching along reef points and canvas seams. The Whydah's crew attempted reducing sail area by reefing topsails and securing loose rigging against incoming gusts. Men climbed shrouds slick with seawater while the mast flexed beneath pressure powerful enough to snap spars or tear lines free from belaying pins. Below deck, the ship groaned constantly as waves slammed against the hull. Cargo shifted dangerously despite efforts to secure barrels and chests with rope lashings. Cannon crews wedged additional chocks beneath artillery carriages because heavy seas could break tackle restraints and send bronze guns weighing several thousand pounds, crashing across gun decks with enough force to pulverize human bodies instantly. Then the fog thickened completely. Witnesses from nearby coastal settlements later described hearing distant cannon fire or bells somewhere offshore, though visibility remained so poor they could not identify the source. Some fishermen claimed they saw lanterns drifting unnaturally through the mist without visible hulls beneath them. Others insisted the storm itself sounded wrong, carrying echoes like voices through the wind. Whether these stories emerged from fear or genuine observation remains impossible to prove. What is certain is that Bellamy's ships became separated within the storm. Navigating blind near the Cape proved catastrophic because submerged sandbars and shifting shoals surrounded the coastline like hidden traps. Waves breaking across these shallows generated chaotic currents capable of rolling even large vessels broadside. The Whydah struck one such shoal violently sometime before dawn. The impact drove the hull sideways while incoming waves smashed directly against the beam. Oak planking reinforced by massive futtocks began splitting beneath repeated stress. Iron spikes tore loose. Seams burst apart under hydraulic pressure as seawater flooded lower compartments. The physics of shipwreck during heavy surf became horrifyingly destructive. Each incoming wave weighing thousands of tons lifted and dropped the vessel repeatedly against submerged sand and rock. Masts snapped under torsion stress. Rigging tangled around collapsing spars. Cannon tore free from their mountings despite tackle restraints, smashing through bulkheads and bodies alike. Powder stores became soaked and useless almost instantly. Sailors trapped below deck drowned inside compartments filling rapidly with seawater, shattered timber, and drifting cargo. Yet the legend diverges from recorded history at this exact moment. Official accounts suggest the Whydah broke apart entirely with only 2 confirmed survivors from a crew estimated between 140 and 180 men. But local folklore preserved a stranger version. According to coastal witnesses interviewed decades later, part of the pirate fleet never appeared among the wreckage at all. One vessel matching descriptions of the Whydah allegedly drifted away from the shoals during the height of the storm, disappearing back into the fog with damaged rigging but still under partial sail. Fishermen claimed they heard screams and bells fading slowly into darkness before silence returned completely. No confirmed wreck corresponding precisely to that description was discovered afterward. Over time, the story transformed. Sailors began reporting sightings of a heavily armed brigantine emerging from fog banks along the Atlantic coast before vanishing abruptly without wake or signal. Merchant captains described phantom lanterns moving silently beside their ships during storms. Some swore they saw shredded black sails hanging motionless despite strong wind. Others reported hearing chains dragging across unseen decks, accompanied by faint cannon fire echoing through the mist. Maritime superstition thrived naturally during the Golden Age of Piracy because sailors inhabited one of the most dangerous environments humans had ever attempted to master. Storms, disease, starvation, mutiny, and shipwreck killed crews constantly across Atlantic trade routes linking Europe, Africa, and the Americas. A single navigational error measured in degrees could drive a vessel onto reefs sharp enough to split hulls open within minutes. Pirate ships operating outside regular supply networks suffered especially brutal conditions. Months at sea transformed even successful vessels into floating ecosystems of decay. Bilge water mixed with rat droppings, mold, spoiled food, and stagnant seawater beneath lower decks, where air circulation barely existed. Scurvy appeared gradually among crews deprived of fresh citrus or vegetables. Gums swelled black around loose teeth, while wounds reopened spontaneously beneath collapsing collagen tissue. Typhus spread through lice nesting inside damp clothing. Yellow fever carried by mosquitoes devastated anchored ships along tropical coastlines, causing jaundice and internal bleeding severe enough to produce black vomit shortly before death. Against this backdrop of constant mortality, fog became more than weather. It became psychological terror. Fog erased distance, direction, and certainty simultaneously. Sailors navigating through thick Atlantic mist often heard phantom bells, distorted voices, or cannon echoes produced by strange acoustic reflections over cold water. Lanterns appeared suspended in darkness without visible hulls beneath them. Entire fleets occasionally lost contact despite sailing only a few hundred yards apart. Pirate crews already exhausted from storms and combat therefore interpreted unusual sightings through lenses shaped by fear and superstition. The legend of Bellamy's vanished ship expanded rapidly after 1717 because the Whydah represented exactly the kind of vessel sailors dreaded encountering in darkness. Heavily armed, overloaded with treasure, and crewed by hardened pirates accustomed to boarding combat fought at arm's length, the ship symbolized maritime violence itself. During battle, its gun decks erupted with sulfur smoke and flame as bronze culverins recoiled violently across planking slick with seawater and blood. Iron round shot weighing up to 12 pounds smashed through merchant hulls while grape shot spread outward like giant shotgun blasts, tearing flesh apart across crowded decks. Boarding parties carrying flintlock pistols, boarding axes, and cutlasses surged across shattered railings amid collapsing rigging and exploding splinters. Survivors from pirate attacks described screams drowned beneath cannon fire, while powder smoke turned daylight gray-black around the ships. To imagine such a vessel emerging silently through fog without warning was terrifying enough. To imagine it crewed by dead men transformed the story into something unforgettable. Reports multiplied throughout the 18th century. Merchant sailors crossing the North Atlantic claimed they encountered a black-hulled brigantine drifting without visible crew before it vanished inside fog banks moments later. Some described hearing chain pumps operating rhythmically despite complete silence otherwise, suggesting unseen sailors desperately fighting flooding below deck. Others insisted the phantom ship carried torn sails riddled with holes, yet moved unnaturally fast against the wind. One New England captain writing in the 1740s claimed his lookout spotted lanterns approaching through fog near Sable Island. before an enormous silhouette appeared only yards away off the starboard beam. According to his account, the vessel carried broken masts and hanging rigging coated in seaweed, while figures stood motionless beside open gun ports. Then the fog swallowed it completely without sound. Whether fabricated, exaggerated, or genuinely believed, these stories reflected deeper anxieties haunting maritime culture. Sailors understood how completely the sea erased people. Shipwrecks often left no bodies, no debris, no explanation. Entire crews vanished during storms with nothing remaining except rumors carried between ports. Insurance companies recorded losses clinically while families waited years without certainty regarding missing relatives. The Atlantic consumed ships continuously beneath waves, hiding wrecks, skeletons, cargo, and cannon within darkness impossible to search effectively. Pirate legends therefore filled gaps left by incomplete knowledge. The vanished ship drifting eternally through fog became symbolic of every unanswered disappearance across the ocean. And nowhere did those fears feel stronger than near the shoals and currents surrounding Cape Cod, where storms had already destroyed countless vessels long before Bellamy ever sailed north. The New England coast during the early 18th century represented one of the most dangerous maritime environments in the Atlantic world. Shifting sandbars moved unpredictably beneath tides and storms, while submerged rocks waited beneath cold surf hidden entirely during high water. Winter gales descending from the north collided violently with warmer ocean currents, creating chaotic weather systems capable of destroying ships within hours. Mariners approaching Cape Cod relied heavily upon dead reckoning calculations derived from compass headings, estimated speed, and elapsed time measured through hourglasses. But during storms, these calculations became dangerously unreliable. Strong currents dragged vessels sideways beneath the surface, while visibility collapsed beneath rain and fog. A captain believing his ship safely offshore might in reality drift directly toward breakers pounding unseen shoals. Pirate vessels faced additional risks because they often sailed overloaded with stolen cargo, extra cannon, and enlarged crews. The Whydah, after Bellamy's raids, carried treasure estimated by some historians at over 4 tons combined weight, including silver coinage, gold dust, indigo, ivory, sugar, and navigational instruments. Such cargo altered hull balance and draft significantly. Water entering through damaged seams during storms increased instability further. Once waves struck broadside against overloaded ships, recovery became almost impossible. Survivors from comparable wrecks described terrifying sequences of structural failure. First came the grinding impact beneath the keel as hull planking scraped against submerged sand or rock. Then the mast shrouds snapped one after another beneath sudden pressure shifts while yards swung wildly overhead like battering rams. Water exploded through seams between planks as pumps failed to keep pace with flooding. Cannon broke loose from tackle restraints, crashing across gun decks and crushing men against bulkheads. Lanterns shattered. Powder stores became soaked. Finally, the hull itself split apart beneath repeated wave impact until the sea swallowed everything. Yet because shipwrecks often occurred at night or inside storms, witnesses rarely observed complete destruction directly. Sounds carried strangely through fog and wind. Bells from sinking ships echoed across miles of open water. Cannon discharged accidentally by shifting artillery during wrecks sounded like distant battle. Lanterns drifting from broken masts resembled ghostly vessels moving through darkness. It is therefore unsurprising that Bellamy's disappearance evolved quickly into supernatural folklore. Coastal communities depended heavily upon maritime trade, yet feared the ocean profoundly. Fishermen recovering wreckage from storms frequently discovered bodies tangled in seaweed weeks after disasters occurred. Cargo washed ashore unpredictably. Shattered barrels, torn sails, splintered masts, human bones. Salvage crews searching wreck sites risked drowning themselves beneath powerful surf and freezing currents. Against this grim reality, the idea of a pirate ship escaping entirely into fog seemed almost plausible. Some legends even claimed Bellamy himself survived and continued raiding secretly under false identities using hidden anchorages along remote coastlines. Others insisted the ship carried so much stolen treasure and bloodshed that God condemned it to wander eternally without harbor. These stories intensified because pirate imagery already carried symbolic power. Black flags displaying skeletons, bleeding hearts, or hourglasses communicated death directly before battle began. Pirate captains cultivated fear deliberately through clothing, rituals, and violence. Blackbeard famously wove slow-burning sulfur matches into his beard before combat, surrounding his face with smoke and sparks until enemies believed something demonic approached through cannon fog. Bellamy's vanished vessel therefore inherited these associations naturally. The fog itself became almost character-like within maritime storytelling, a living wall capable of swallowing ships whole. Sailors navigating dense Atlantic mist described sensations of complete disorientation where sea and sky merged into one gray void. Compass needles fluctuated strangely near certain coastlines. Echoes distorted direction. Waves became invisible until striking the hull directly. Men standing lookout during such conditions often imagined shapes moving just beyond visibility. Sleep deprivation worsened hallucinations. Crews surviving storms for days without rest saw phantom sails, heard voices, or mistook floating debris for approaching ships. Under these circumstances, a damaged pirate vessel glimpsed briefly through fog before disappearing forever could easily transform into legend lasting centuries. And unlike many maritime myths, Bellamy's story possessed enough real tragedy and missing details to remain disturbingly believable. Centuries after the Waida's disappearance, divers and treasure hunters searching the Cape Cod coast continued discovering evidence linking the wreck to Bellamy's final voyage. In 1984, underwater explorer Barry Clifford identified a wreck site containing cannon, ballast stones, coins, and artifacts consistent with the pirate flagship. Yet even this discovery failed to end the legend because the Atlantic had scattered debris across enormous distances beneath shifting sand and violent storms over nearly 300 years. Archaeologists recovered bronze cannon coated in marine growth, iron shackles from the ship's earlier slave trading operations, pistols fused together by corrosion, and thousands of silver coins minted across multiple empires. Human remains emerged occasionally from the seabed tangled with timber fragments and rusted weaponry. But despite these discoveries, questions remained unanswered. How many ships from Bellamy's fleet vanished completely? How many bodies were never recovered? Did sections of the fleet escape the storm only to disappear elsewhere afterward? Maritime historians know that contemporary records from storms and wrecks often contain contradictions because witnesses observed events through darkness, fog, exhaustion, and fear. One sailor's certainty became another's rumor by the next port. This uncertainty preserved the phantom ship story long after physical evidence surfaced. Sailors throughout the 19th century continued reporting strange sightings near Cape Cod and the North Atlantic shipping lanes. Steamship crews navigating fog banks described hearing bells where no vessels appeared on radar-like lookout sweeps. Fishing boats claimed they encountered black-hulled sailing ships drifting silently against prevailing wind before dissolving into mist. Some reports emerged during severe storms when exhaustion and fear clearly influenced perception. Others came from experienced captains with decades at sea who insisted privately they had seen something impossible. Maritime culture treated such stories carefully. Publicly, rational explanations prevailed. Optical distortion, floating wreckage, atmospheric reflection. Privately, many sailors remained deeply superstitious. The sea punished arrogance constantly. Ships considered unsinkable vanished overnight. Entire crews disappeared without distress signals. Even advanced navigation technology failed during extreme weather. In earlier centuries, this uncertainty felt overwhelming. Pirate ships represented concentrated symbols of everything sailors feared already: violence, lawlessness, greed, mutiny, storm, and death. A pirate vessel disappearing forever into fog therefore became more than historical mystery. It embodied the ocean's ability to erase human certainty completely. Consider the physical reality aboard Bellamy's final voyage. More than 100 men crowded inside a wooden hull, groaning beneath storm pressure while seawater flooded lower compartments faster than pumps could remove it. Lantern flames swung wildly above cannon decks coated in sulfur residue and blood from previous raids. Salted provisions rotted inside broken barrels, while terrified sailors climbed rigging slick with freezing rain, trying desperately to reduce sail area before masts snapped. Outside, visibility collapsed into gray nothingness, broken only by crashing surf somewhere ahead. Men shouted orders no one could hear properly through wind exceeding hurricane force. Compass readings fluctuated uselessly while waves hammered the hull broadside hard enough to split oak planking between the futtocks. Somewhere within that chaos, Bellamy himself either drowned instantly beneath collapsing rigging or vanished into black Atlantic water, carrying stolen treasure and pirate legend down with him. Yet because the storm swallowed the event almost completely, imagination filled the silence afterward. The vanished ship became eternal precisely because nobody witnessed its true ending clearly. And perhaps that uncertainty remains more frightening than any confirmed wreck ever could be. A ship destroyed leaves debris. A ship lost forever leaves possibilities. Somewhere beyond the fog, sailors imagined, the pirate vessels still drifted silently across black water with torn sails hanging above empty decks, while waves echoed endlessly through rotting hull timbers beneath the moon. Imagine standing watch aboard an Atlantic merchantman sometime around 1730, while dense fog rolls across the sea thick enough to erase the horizon entirely. Your clothes are soaked with freezing spray. The deck beneath your boots creaks as the hull rises and falls through invisible swells. Somewhere forward, a bell rings once, then again, distant and distorted by the mist. Sailors freeze beside the rigging. Lantern light reflects back from the fog itself, creating pale halos around every movement. Then a shape appears briefly off the larboard beam. Black hull, torn sails hanging motionless. Open gun ports dark as graves above the waterline. No voices, no visible crew. Only the faint groan of timber and chain carried across the waves. A moment later, the fog closes again, and the ship is gone forever. Whether the phantom vessel truly originated from Bellamy's lost flagship matters less than what the legend reveals about the world sailors inhabited during the Golden Age of Piracy. The Atlantic Ocean was not merely a trade route. It was a vast killing ground where storms, reefs, disease, mutiny, cannon fire, and navigational error consumed ships constantly. Pirate vessels represented the sharpest edge of that violence. Floating fortresses packed with bronze cannon, black powder, cutlasses, and desperate men living between unimaginable wealth and sudden death. The Whydah itself embodied this contradiction perfectly. Built originally for the slave trade, transformed into a pirate warship, overloaded with stolen treasure, then swallowed by storm and fog before most of its crew reached adulthood. Its disappearance became terrifying because it felt unfinished. No surviving captain returned with a complete account. No official report explained every missing ship or body. The ocean simply closed over the wreckage and left stories behind. For centuries afterwards, sailors crossing fog-bound waters near Cape Cod carried those stories with them. They listened nervously to bells echoing through the mist. They stared toward phantom lanterns moving across black swells. They imagined shattered pirate ships drifting eternally beyond sight with dead crews still standing watch beside silent cannon. And somewhere beneath the Atlantic waves, scattered among sandbars and broken reefs, the real remains of Bellamy's fleet still rest in darkness while cold currents move endlessly through collapsed hull timbers and rusted gun ports, exactly as they did on the night the fog swallowed the pirate ship forever.